You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
Happy Friday, Dolphins, and welcome to the latest installment of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can give me a follow on Twitter at KevinMD4, and you can follow the show on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Sorry for the delay in getting this episode out, but over the past 3 weeks, my wife and I have dealt with the two kids having a combined 4 ear infections, 1 sinus infection, croup, and a nasty stomach bug that hit all 4 of us. So apologies for getting this podcast out a couple days late, but given that it's the bye week, I figured why not make it into sort of a joint podcast where I'll recap the unfortunate loss to the Chiefs 21-14 last Sunday in Frankfurt, Germany, and we'll kind of do a mid-season review with maybe some superlatives and awards, that sort of thing once we get into the show. And since we are not celebrating a victory Monday or victory bye week, which this one, the ramifications from this loss, the magnitude is going to be felt down the road, and we'll talk about that at the end of the show. But since we're not celebrating a victory, we have our Smokehead Scotch, which we've had on the show before. Also talked about this last fall on the Same Old Dolphins show with Josh and Aaron. It's an Islay Scotch, but the distillery is based in Glasgow. This one, it's like a 2.5, 2.6 out of 5 stars for me. It's drinkable. It's easy. It's not a true Islay Scotch. It's got the hallmarks of it, but nothing too in-depth. That's an easy drinker. So if you're looking to switch from a traditional Scotch or bourbon into the Islas, that's a step in the kiddie pool for you. So, on to the matter at hand, recapping the Dolphins' unfortunate loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll start with the positives. Defensively, having the full component of guys for the first time since the Jalen Ramsey trade, let's say, since before the season started on paper, this is what the defense should have looked like all season. This is the first time we've had it. And aside from the Chiefs' opening script, it was near dominant. They did more than enough to win this ball game when you consider the fact that Kansas City had 267 total yards, 16 first downs. They scored 14 points on offense. Patrick Mahomes threw for a season-low 185 yards. They held the Chiefs to 93 rushing yards on 24 carries. It's a 3.9 yards per carry average, so under 4 per rush. Held the Chiefs to 3 of 10 on third downs, had 2 sacks, 1 turnover, and held Travis Kelce to 3 catches for a measly 14 yards. Noah Gray was the Chiefs' leading receiver with 34 yards in this game. That's an exceptional effort from the defense, and I think it's shown really since the Philadelphia game, even though that was a loss as well. This defense can play well enough to stack up with the elite teams in the NFL. It's the offense, and you can say that's due to the fault of a lot of different things: road games, tough environments, injuries to the offensive line, injuries to players, Mike McDaniel not having things well planned enough, organizationally, operations management, Tua not being good enough, Tyreek having a bad game. Whatever ails the Dolphins as a road team, it stinks, and they need to get it fixed. And I think, fortunately for the Dolphins, with 8 games to go, only 3 are on the road. You've got the Jets on Black Friday. You've got the Commanders the week after that. and you've got the Ravens in Baltimore as the penultimate game of the regular season. They need to get that fixed. But in terms of the defense, this is what we thought we were going to get. And I want to start by highlighting Bradley Chubb. As I gave him some flack earlier in the season, he didn't really turn things on until, what are we going to call it, after the Buffalo game when we played the Giants. Chubb has been on fire since that point. He's amassed 6 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, and 4 forced fumbles this year. All of those lead the team in each of those categories. Getting Jalen Phillips back to 100% has proven to be a huge boost. I think if we go back to our Fangio fixes, we've finally got the front rotation where it needs to be. The front 4, Chubb, Phillips, and then Sealer and Wilkins on the inside, are eating up big amounts of snaps to the point where they were just outright waived Brandon Peely. Emmanuel Ogbah did not register a defensive snap the last game, just played 7 on special teams. And really, Deshaun Hand has gotten a handful of snaps here and there and some goal line looks, but that's been about it. They're basically rotating in Raekwon Davis and Andrew Van Ginkel to make it a front 6 on the line, along with the linebackers. And they finally stopped messing around with Andrew Van Ginkel as an off-ball guy. They did it in the goal line situation where they blitzed him, and the Chiefs scored a touchdown on the screen. Surprise, surprise. But that cover zero blitz that Fangio called has been a common call in the low red zone. Want to give kudos to David Long because per Pro Football Focus, he's been the best linebacker in the entire league against the run this year with like a 91.1 grade. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Was phenomenal again against Kansas City. I'm glad Fangio has finally seen the correct path here. Andrew Van Ginkel's snaps have been fairly limited since the Philadelphia game, and I think Fangio's finally gotten off trying to ride that hunch into something it was never probably going to be. So I'm glad we're at this point with the front 6. I'm glad we're at this point with the rotation. Yeah, it comes at the detriment to Emmanuel Ogbah, who I still think could be a solid contributor in this system. But alas, his days in Miami appear to be pretty numbered. Good depth to have, though, in case something should happen to Chubb, Phillips, or Van Ginkel. The secondary, I thought, played really well. There's a couple of missed opportunities, but you can see where this is going to go. You have the one example where Jalen Ramsey almost got a hand on the ball from Mahomes into the hole shot. It was a cover 2 play on half of the cover 6, so the quarter side was on the other half. Actually, this would be cover 8, half, quarter. But in the game, Ramsey allowed 2 catches for just 8 yards. Xavier Howard allowed 2 catches for 8 yards. Ramsey allowed 1 for 13. That's phenomenal when trying to attack. Now, I know the Chiefs don't have the perimeter threats. Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney aren't exactly A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith or Stephon Diggs, but impressive nonetheless, the work that the Dolphins are able to do with this full component. And I think what's even more impressive is when you tie that in with some of the rush games and the stunts that Fangio's been able to do. Miami's tied for the league lead in quarterback hits with 65, and I have it here later in the show with some of their stats, but tied for 4th in the NFL with 29 sacks. So last year they had 40 total in the blitz-happy defense that Josh Boyer ran. This year they're almost to that mark, and we still have roughly half the season left to play. Kader Kohu, on the other hand, now that he's kind of back fully in the slot, he's now the sombrero guy. He's going to be the guy that teams target underneath, and I think that plays into his advantage because he's so good coming forward and he's so good at quick outbreaking routes. You don't have to worry about him as much on the perimeter getting beat deep down the field. I'm curious to see how much they actually do with Jalen Ramsey moving forward in terms of matchup stuff, or if that would be something that you do, against a Chiefs team if you have a rematch. Because they didn't do a whole lot of special coverage stuff with him, and they still held Travis Kelce to 3 for 14. So you're doing a good job there. And I think what's even more fun is you've got Nick Needham back in the fold now, and you've got him as a dime corner. There's a lot of rosters out there around the league where, it's a complete luxury to have Nick Needham as your dime corner. He'd be a number 2 corner or a starting nickel corner for a lot of teams. I think he had like 6 plays on defense when Miami was in dime this past week. So it's a luxury. Nice to see this full complement of guys on the defensive side step it up. And you look at some of the offenses Miami's going to face in the second half of the season. This unit could continue its climb to being one of the league's best. We'll talk about some statistical measures for them and metrics for them later in the show. The offensive side of the ball in Germany, kind of the same deal as what happened in Philadelphia. Tough to get started, even though you had Teron Armstead back, you had Connor Williams back. Felt like the first half, play call-wise, was way too conservative, and it felt like Tua was about the only player who brought their A game. Put a nice ball out there for Tyreek that he couldn't handle, had another one. I don't know if Jalen Waddle lost it or took a bad angle on it, but looked like he should have been closer to making a play on that ball than he was. And then you had the ghastly screen call, even though Kansas City had stopped it twice before, where Tyreek Hill barely has his hands on the ball. He's hit and kind of wrestles with it and then fumbles it that gets returned for a touchdown. That was a backbreaker. And that's now 34 points given up by the Dolphins when the defense is not on the field. That's unacceptable. And we'll talk about that later in the show as well. They didn't run the ball well in the first half, ran the ball better in the second half, and Raheem Mostert really kind of had the hot hand in the fourth quarter, got him back into the game. The Chris Jones unnecessary roughness penalty helped. But you go back to that start. This is their first half with 6 drives. This is how the Dolphins went. Punt, 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 punt. Then the drive where Tyreek fumbled and KC returned it for a touchdown. And then another punt. So 5 punts and a touchdown allowed by the offense. Not good. You had exactly 100 yards of total offense in the first half. You had 3 penalties, 1 operational timeout on the first drive, 1 sack in that game. And then one of the other things that some people have mentioned about, I posted this the other day on my Twitter timeline. The Dolphins, in their 3 losses, are a combined 10 out of 33 on third downs. That's a 30.3 conversion percent rate. In their 6 wins, Miami's 28 of 63. That's a 44.4 conversion rate. For the season, that makes them 38 of 96. That's 39.58%. That's 17th in the NFL. And for the record, the 2 teams playing right now as I record this in the god-awful Thursday night game that is the Panthers and Bears, both of them have a better third down conversion rate than the Dolphins, as do the Denver Broncos, who were a mess up until the last couple weeks, Houston, who has a rookie in C.J. Stroud, and the Green Bay Packers with Jordan Love, who's a first-time starter. All of those 5 teams have a conversion rate on third down better than the Dolphins. Now, some people have asked me about down and distance stuff. Should that really matter when you consider Miami's yards per play average is like leading the NFL by 1.5 yards? I don't think it does. And someone asked me specifically about Kansas City and the third downs there in that game and about how many times they faced 3rd and 10. So Miami, on the drives that hit 3rd and 10 in that game, you had 2 procedural penalties on wide receivers. You had a false start and an illegal shift. You had 1 intentional grounding penalty. You gave up 2 sacks and 1 holding call. Now, of those 2, only 2 of those things are attributable to the offensive line, the holding on Connor Williams and 1 of the sacks. The other sack was the corner blitz where Miami didn't have enough guys. That's a schematic one. That falls on Tua for not recognizing it and making a line caller adjusting to the hot route. It's 3rd and 10, but only 1 drive in that game hit a 3rd and 10 without a penalty or a sack. So I don't really think it's a yards and down and distance to go problem, but it's an amalgamation of things. And that doesn't bode well for a team that's got to go on the road in the playoffs. Now, we'll see how the seeding falls off, but we'll talk about that too. The other things, Tyreek had a bad day. You had the drop and a fumble. Jalen Waddle's been playing through an injury since camp. Has also had a couple other big hits. Hasn't really been himself. Mike McDaniel spoke about that and getting him right during the bye week. And then, believe it or not, without River Craycraft and Eric Ezekama, Miami really doesn't have a weapon as a number 3 receiver. It's tough for them to operate when you're trailing and operating out of 11 or even 10 personnel with the receivers that they have. Cedric Wilson just isn't as dynamic and as fast as some of the other guys. You had the miscommunication with him. Braxton Berrios got his ass absolutely handed to him anytime the Chiefs ran press coverage. He got erased. Chase Claypool doesn't know what he's really doing yet, and he's slow to boot. It short-circuits Miami's offense in a big way, especially when you don't have the run game working, which Miami didn't really have in the first half. I thought Tua was fine. I really like that his pocket presence continues to grow. I feel like there's more yards to be had on some of the scramble opportunities, but he's not taking bad sacks. He's not running into trouble. You had the miscommunication, though, with Cedric Wilson on the penultimate play. Even if he's throwing, a back shoulder or a deep comeback, you've got to step into that throw and make it instead of falling away. The bad snap play, it's not a great snap by Connor Williams, but it's not egregiously bad. But it's on the wrong side for a lefty quarterback to try and handle. But Tua's got to handle that. And I think what's worse is if he handles it, you have Jalen Waddle wide open over the middle of the field for a walk-in touchdown. It's there. It's wide open. Kansas City botched the coverage. That's an unserious way to lose a football game. And it's a game where you feel like you did everything possible, everything right that you could have done on defense, barring generating more turnovers. And you lost this game. You lost it, and the magnitude of it is going to be felt down the road. You had an opportunity to go into the bye at 7-2 with a 1 seed with a tiebreaker over Kansas City. And because of the Bengals' win later that night over Buffalo, a 2-game lead in the AFC East instead of a 1-game lead. Considering you outgained the Chiefs, had more rushing yards, more passing yards, more first downs, won the time of possession battle, had 3 fewer penalties, that's a tough one. And I go back to the third downs. 3 of 12 on third down against Kansas City. 4 of 11 on third down versus Philly. 3 of 10 on third down versus Buffalo earlier in the year. That's not a recipe to win a football game. And I don't know if it's just Mike McDaniel's got a little bit of, if you follow college football, you might get the reference, a little bit of Jim Tressel in him, where when you're down, you start to get a little panicky. Now, maybe that's more of a thing on the road because they were down earlier at home against Carolina and came roaring back and scored 42 points or 35 points in a row. Man, but that one just hurts. I don't know if it's Tua is just shrinking in big moments in road games. Like you look at 2020 against Buffalo, didn't play well. You look at 2021, he had the miserable game against Tennessee. You look at last year with the games in San Francisco and against the Chargers on the road before the concussion. Played well against Buffalo until the very end of it. Couldn't get a big play down the stretch. But you've also had multiple games in those same games where your defense hasn't played well, your run game hasn't shown up, you've had receivers drop passes. So it's not just Tua. It's the offense as a whole, and whether it's been under Flores and whichever offensive coordinator, take your pick, or whether it's been under Mike McDaniel, Miami has trouble on road games. And you wonder now, because essentially you need to gain 2 games on Kansas City and at the same time hope you can beat Baltimore and then hope Jacksonville loses another. As good as the Dolphins are and as favorable as I think their second half schedule is, I have a hard time seeing them get back to the number 1 seed, which means you're probably only getting 1 home game, maybe 2 if you're lucky in the playoffs. But I have a hard time seeing this team, the way they go about things operationally, going into a road playoff game and having success, just based on the history of it. Now, I know people are talking about like the 99 Rams who didn't beat a winning team all season until the playoffs and the stomps and guts thing, and I buy into that to a certain degree, but the evidence of this team is here, and it's been here, over a 3.5 season time sample. They don't tend to do well in road games, especially later in the year. And you look at the AFC picture right now, the only road site that you would want to go to in January is Jacksonville. You don't want to go to Arrowhead. You don't want to go to Baltimore. You don't want to have to go to whichever AFC North team ends up winning that division. Jacksonville's about the only team you want to go to. And Pittsburgh's probably about the only team that's in the playoff hunt where if they ended up somehow winning the North, which would be something given how they've played, that's about the only team I would actually have confidence in going to on the road, even more so than Jacksonville. So we'll see how Miami responds. And in my eyes, 2 of the 3 remaining road games are pretty big tests. You have at New York on a short week, so you've got a logistical thing, and against a front that just tears people's faces off without blitzing against a 2-high safety team. Statistically speaking, metrics-wise, 2 has been better against single high safeties and teams that blitz. So you better hope the run game's working that day. And the Jets have been susceptible to certain teams running the ball. But we'll see if Miami can do that. Washington's a bit of a tricky one. Their offense has just been absolutely eviscerating people via the pass game the past couple weeks. Unfortunately, their defense is pretty toothless now that they've traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat. That might be a game where, if you can get to 28 points, you're probably going to win that. And then you've got at Baltimore in early January, or late December, early January. I can't remember exactly on the calendar. That does not sound fun. But that's looking down the road. Let's look at where we are mid-season. Now, before the regular season started, I went on the Finside the NFL panel show, which I will actually be doing next week. I believe it'll be on Tuesday for our mid-season roundtable. But on the preseason roundtable show, we had to give a game-by-game prediction, win-loss prediction, which I hate doing because the NFL is so fluid and injuries happen and, all of that. If you go back and you watch my appearance on there, I predicted Miami would be 11-6. I had them at 5-4 at the bye. They're a game ahead of that. I had Miami losing the opener to the Chargers, which nearly happened. And then I had them losing to Buffalo, Philly, and Kansas City. The remaining losses I had for them were at the Jets on Black Friday. I was assuming that Aaron Rodgers would be there. Obviously, he got hurt a couple weeks or a week after that show was recorded. And then I have them losing to Baltimore, the penultimate game. So all in all, I think things are sitting pretty where Miami ought to be. 11-6 or 12-5. Maybe they do better. I don't know. But they're ahead of the 5-4 pace that I had them on. And I remember texting a good buddy of mine, Evan, who is a big Dolphins fan, has contributed to some Dolphins talk stuff in the past as well. I texted him after the Philly loss and told him that if they could just get to 6-3 by the bye, I thought they were in a pretty good spot. What really kind of bothers me is that they were in such a good spot to potentially win the game in Germany against Kansas City and be 7-2 with that lead. Really, the last two losses feel tainted just because their defense has played well enough to win both of those ball games. But in my eyes, they're ahead of schedule, and you've had two opportunities where, with a better offensive performance, you probably could be 7-2 or even 8-1, and it just didn't materialize for you. Now, looking at where we are at the midway point of the season, let's look at the defense first. We've definitely seen some progress from how things started week one and where they're progressing now. So, 12th in total defense, which is yards per game allowed. They're 25th in points per game allowed at 25 even a game. But if you take away the 34 points, which the defense was not on the field for, we talked about that earlier in the show, that drops their average to 21.2 points per game, which would be 17th in the league. So you've really got the three bad performances on the road defensively in terms of points. The Chargers game week one, Buffalo certainly, and then Philadelphia giving up 31 are your real outliers. One interesting trend around the league, and this is food for thought here, is despite the Dolphins' horrendous performance against the run in week one against the Chargers, they are allowing 106.2 yards per game rushing. That sits at 13th in the NFL at this point. Miami last year, at the end of the season, gave up 103 yards per game total, which was 4th. So you're giving up 3.2 yards more per game now, and you're 13th. Run defense around the league is way, way up. Last year, there were only 3 teams that held teams below 100 yards rushing for the whole season. I think there's like 9 at this juncture this year. Philadelphia and Detroit are way up there. I think Philadelphia is at like 65 yards. Detroit's around 70. So a full 30, 35, 40 yards ahead of where the Dolphins' pace is. But you can see it getting a lot better. They're actually 6th in the league right now in yards per carry allowed at 3.9 yards a carry, which is actually less than last year, where they allowed 4.1. They're currently 12th in passing defense at 216 yards per game. Tied for 4th in sacks right now with 29. Tied for 1st in quarterback hits with 65. And you look at some of the offenses you're going to play. You've got the Raiders coming out of the bye in an East Coast time slot at 1 p.m. I don't expect them to come out, guns blazing. Not that they were a potent offense anyway. You should get pretty fat on that. You should get pretty fat on the Jets offense, at least in the Black Friday game with Zach Wilson likely the quarterback. I don't think people realize it. Washington in the past 3 games has thrown for nearly 1,000 yards with Sam Howell, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel. But there's not much of a run game to speak of there. So you might be able to kind of get healthy those 3 games out of the bye, and then you got a rookie quarterback in Will Levis. So I think for me, if Miami can go 3-1 which is what I projected him to go in my game-by-game predictions before the season. If you can go 3-1 or 4-0, which would put you at 9-4 or 10-3, you've got a really good chance to make the playoffs and potentially win the division, which is, I think, exactly what you'd want to have going into the last, quarter of the season with 3 of your last 4 games at home. So I think defensively, if they stay healthy, we've seen now against arguably the best quarterback in football and the second best offense in football behind Miami's own, we've seen what this defense is capable of. I think it gets better from here, provided they stay healthy. Offensively, it's about as good as you could have possibly asked for. First in total offense, first in passing offense at 287.4 yards a game, second in rushing offense now behind only Baltimore, although you get Devon Achane back after the bye. First in total points scored, first in points per game at 31.7. We mentioned it earlier. The one kind of knock is your 17th in third down conversion rate. And again, that's behind Carolina with the rookie quarterback, Chicago, who's been putrid offensively and has Tyson Bagent, a rookie quarterback right now, Denver, who's been a mess up until the last 2 weeks, Houston, who has a rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud, and Green Bay, who's got Jordan Love, a first-year starter. You're behind those 5 teams, along with the cast of characters you'd expect. Buffalo, Kansas City, I believe the Chargers are up there, Eagles are up there. You've got to get better on third downs. And this historic pattern of coming up small, especially in road games and big moments, has got to shift. But I think over the next, quarter of the season, the next 4 games, that's home against the Raiders, at the Jets, at the Commanders, home against the Titans, you've got a chance to really, really get right, especially with your ground game kind of revamping the Mostert and Achane duo to set yourself up for a really nice stretch run. And maybe, just maybe, you got a chance to get right back in there and have a potential shot at that 1 seed. You need some help, and Dolphins fans, you got to root for the teams that play the teams ahead of Miami. So that's San Francisco this week, plays Jacksonville. Root for anyone that plays against Kansas City. Root for anyone that plays against Baltimore at this juncture to try and keep that race close. And then we talked about doing maybe some superlatives at the midway point. So just a couple I had jotted down. Team MVP at this point, I would give it to Tyreek Hill. I think he's made such a huge difference, both in terms of what he does on the field and how he's boosted Tua's confidence with what he says off the field. You've had a less than healthy Jalen Waddle for most of the year, and Tyreek Hill's on pace for 2,000. I think he already has more touchdowns this year at the halfway point than he did all of last season. You've been able to sustain injuries at just about every other spot. I would give my offensive player of the year to Tua. He's done really well. The mistakes he's made aren't in big moments, for the most part anymore. He's got a better command of the offense. I think he's got a way better pocket presence than he had as a rookie, and it's still markedly improved from where it was a year ago, his first year in the McDaniel offense. I've been very impressed with him. Defensive player of the year at this point, I would probably give the nod to Bradley Chubb, maybe slightly ahead of Christian Wilkins and David Long. Those 2 guys have been very, very impressive. Xavier Howard's been very impressive. Javon Holland and Deshaun Elliott are a really nice duo at safety. You've had a lot of good moments. best win, and I guess stay with me here when I explain it, would be their last win against New England at home before the Kansas City trip. That, to me, you're coming off of a bad loss before a massive game, and you sweep a division opponent. I know the Patriots right now are 2-7, not a good record, but the defensive plans that Bill Belichick has been able to cook up, what he did to get that interception off Tua in the early part of that game was a pretty sinister look, where you have a standard half-field safety rob the curl zone and get an interception. And to me, the defense did exactly what they're supposed to do in a game like that. Offensively, I thought that the Tua especially did an outstanding job of taking what the defense gave him. He didn't force throws. They got their big plays when they needed them. They did exactly what you would need to do to kind of grind out and sweep a Patriots team. You look at the success the Patriots had in the first matchup, relatively speaking, on defense, holding Miami to 24 points. Thought they had a much better game plan and possibly had the potential to score more points against New England the second time around. So that'd be their most impressive win. Most disappointing loss to me would be Buffalo. I thought it was a pretty bad defensive plan. You stayed with them drive for drive until it was 21-14, and then you have a Raheem Mostert fumble, then you give up a touchdown, and then you're behind in the game flow, and the bottom just fell out of that one. I think Fangio has sort of redeemed himself from that poor performance against the Bills with pretty good ones against Philly and against Kansas City. So many opportunities to have good wins. I thought the Chargers win was huge. Tua had some very clutch performances there. The Broncos game, the historic victory, the point margin, all of that. I'd still go with the Patriots. The second Patriots win is the most impressive to me, and then obviously the Bills loss. Guys who I think can really step it up the second half of the year. Would really love to see what Xavier Howard can do now that Jalen Ramsey's fully back. Gave up 2 catches for 8 yards against Kansas City. I don't remember what he gave up exactly against New England. I think it was like 1 catch for 12. But I think he's going to get some opportunities. Would really like to see Kader Kohu kind of entrench himself in the slot like he did as a rookie and have some more opportunities to make plays on the ball. David Long has been a monster. I think now that Fangio has finally nearly 100% killed off the Van Ginkel at inside linebacker experiment. I still shake my head about how dumb some of those attempts at that were. I really think David Long's going to show what an impressive player he is. Offensively, Teron Armstead's coming back. I think people sort of underappreciate how valuable he is when he's on the field, and the main focus is that when he's not on the field, I think what you can do as an offense with him, despite how well Kendall Lamb has played, is pretty far superior to what you can do with Armstead versus Lamb on the field. And then one I'm really intrigued to see is what happens with Liam Eichenberg if he does move forward as the left guard while Rob Jones is out. If you go back and watch the Kansas City game, the very first drive where Eichenberg was in, they lined up Chris Jones over him on that third down, and Eichenberg just flat out beat him, won the rep on that third down play. You never really heard Chris Jones the rest of that game other than the penalty when Eichenberg was in. So, we'll see with him. We'll see how long Rob Jones is out. But that's one I'm interested in watching. think really the biggest challenges left for me would be, I think logistically speaking, the Black Friday game against the Jets. You've got a short week. You're playing Monday Night Football, and then the Jets after a physical Tennessee team back-to-back. That's tough. And then you've got Dallas at Baltimore, home versus Buffalo. That final 3-game stretch is pretty rough. Really, 4-game stretch is pretty rough. Yours truly will be down for the Monday night game against Tennessee, booking flights and lodging tomorrow. But excited to come down and see that ball game. Hopefully Miami is on a nice win streak going into that one. I think that's going to do it for our mid-season recap of the Kansas City loss. Unfortunately, the Dolphins falling 21-14 in Frankfurt. That's going to do it for me. One quick note, though. This is from a good friend of mine. If you've been on Dolphins Twitter, I'm just going to read this from her. It's Lisa, I'm fighting cancer for you, Mom. Fanatic1972 is her Twitter handle. But she is promoting the Dolphins, the Ride Dolphins Cancer Challenge. It's ridedcc.com. Excuse me, that's ridedcc.com, the Dolphins Cancer Challenge. You can register as a virtual participant. When you register, it's going to ask you if you want to join a team or create your own. Select join a team and search for Team Hurricanes/Fanatics with a Z fighting cancer. So that's Team Hurricanes/Fanatics fighting cancer. There's no registration fee or minimum fundraising requirement, but they are seeking contributions and riders to join the Dolphins Cancer Challenge event coming up in February of 2024. This year they have some cool changes with the Hall of Fame stuff, with Zach Thomas going in. So you can do a 5K, a 13-mile bike ride for Dan Marino, a 39-mile bike ride for Larry Zonka, a 54-mile ride for Zach Thomas, or a 99-mile ride for Jason Taylor. So again, please visit ridedcc.com, search for Lisa's team, and join the fight, the one team, one fight against cancer. That's going to do it for me on the show this week. We'll be back with a recap of the Dolphins-Raiders game. Hopefully we'll record that Sunday night and have that out Monday that week. Hopefully, knock on wood, no more sick kids for the time being. Again, follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow Dolphins Talk Weekly on iTunes or Spotify. You can visit the website, DolphinsTalk.com. Thank you, guys. I will be on the Finside the NFL Midseason Roundtable Tuesday night. I believe that's going to be at 9 or 9:30. I think 9 on Tuesday. And then we'll be back with an episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly next Sunday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the bye week. Get some things done around the house. Fins up.